What if Robert Baratheon lived, but Ned Stark still died? Part 2. Let's explore the depths of it in the video. Robert stares at the Crypts of Winterfell, looking at the image of his dear friend Ned Stark, who has taken the newest spot there. The sculptor had done him justice, but it doesn't compare to the living thing, and never will. He lays some flowers at his feet, right beside the longsword the Starks had given as tribute, and then glances towards the gathered Stark family.
Your father was a good man, and loyal to the end. Even as I fell into a coma, he continued to fulfill my wishes and take control of the throne. I know he didn't want it, but he still did, and died for it. When I heard about that, gods above, I wished that boar had just killed me instead.
He pauses to glance at the Stark children. Catelyn sniffs, and Sansa wipes her eyes. Even Robb bites his lip. The king allows them to compose themselves before continuing.
But what is done cannot be undone. All I could do is fix the mistakes he paid for. I had Cersei and her family removed and defended the city as Tywin laid siege to it, at least until Renly arrived. After that, all I could do was rule in the way Ned would have wanted. I repaired the damage sown by Tywin and made peace with the other houses. But now I am at the crossroads, and I came here hoping to find some wisdom with Ned's spirit.
Robert glances at the statue one final time, staring into its stone eyes, as if hoping that it would speak to him. But the stone remains silent, and he bows his head, thanking his hosts for letting him visit. As he makes his way out of the crypts, one question continues to linger in his mind. What would Ned do? What should have been several months flies by fast, and the Yunkish ambassadors are losing patience with him. Though he can barely stand the sight of them, Robert cannot deny their logic. If dragons were to be unleashed on the known world once again, entire kingdoms would tremble, his included. As if he didn't already have enough troubles with the wall. Though the wildlings were beaten back, the talk of the White Walkers has put the Night's Watch on edge. He has sent reinforcements to secure their castle, but all he can do is wait. Meanwhile, he wishes he could do the same with Yunkai. However, the deadline he set was fast approaching. Renly's letters do little to sway his decision, as he was only a child during the rebellion. Robert decided to send him, as he would have the least bad blood with Daenerys. But even with that, and his apologies, then he still writes that she was cool and uninterested in talking with him any more than necessary. However, he notes that she's still kind to her subjects, and fair, in a childish way, and fears her dragons as much as she loves them. Even Sir Barristan's wisdom has not fully moderated her. As Robert ponders what to do next, he barely notices Sir Davos until he bumps into him. Robert nearly falls over, but the Onion Knight helps steady him.
Begging your pardon, Your Grace.
Don't worry. It was my fault. It seems I've lost myself in my thoughts.
He pauses and glances over to the man, recalling what Stannis had said to him. He always spoke highly of the knight, and rubs his jaw.
May I ask your counsel for a moment, sir?
What troubles you, Your Grace? Though I warn I have little experience in lordly matters.
Good. I don't need more flatterers. I am haunted by a decision. An ambassador from Yunkai has arrived and requested I join a coalition against Daenerys Stormborn.
Daenerys? Last surviving child of the Targaryen dynasty, if I'm not mistaken. And Yunkai is a slaver city. What would they want with her?
This girl has found herself in Slaver's Bay and has started attacking the slaver cities and freeing the slaves. Yunkai wants me to help them stop her because they are aware of our enmity. They warn if I take no action, the dragons will continue to grow until they fly.
I suppose that's true, but I am to assume that once they overthrow this Dragon Queen, they will return the slaver cities to their original state.
Aye, the Westeros has no part in the slave trade.
Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but I don't think you'll be able to say that. True, while there were no slaves traded here in the Seven Kingdoms, you would be supporting the trade. Your knights and swords would be restoring slavery to this place. While you wouldn't be breaking the law, helping another place restore slavery doesn't feel like it would be following it either.
I feared you would say that. Gods, I wish Ned was here.
Well, Your Grace, maybe you should ask yourself this. Why did Ned Stark stand by you during your rebellion?
Robert stares at the knight for a long moment, though he knows the answer immediately, and thanks him for his wisdom. When the king returns to King's Landing, the Yunkish ambassador is waiting for him, his arms crossed impatiently as he demands an answer, reminding them that their allies will set sail in a matter of weeks. However, this time Robert's answer is clear as day. He will not support any endeavor that will allow the practice of slavery, dragons or not. The Jaskari's face reddens, and he calls Robert a fool and says he will allow fire and blood to rain down on his realm because of this madness. The king simply replies that it will fall on his city first. Without another word, the ambassador marches off, cursing Robert. The king sinks back into his throne and feels a rush of pride at his words, but that is quickly soured at the thought of what is to happen next. Even without the Seven Kingdoms, Daenerys is in a difficult position. With Qarth, Nugis, and Volantis supporting this coalition, the odds still do not look favorable. But it seems like nothing is going to stop her as Renly's letters continue to come, saying that Daenerys is preparing her army to defend Meereen. And yet it seems like she's always played the long odds. A girl exiled from her birthright, orphaned by his rebellion, and now commanding armies and dragons, carving out a kingdom in a land that does not want her. Yet he couldn't help but chuckle as the idea reminded him of himself during the days of the rebellion, storming the Trident, hammer in hand, facing down Rhaegar Targaryen beneath the ruby-strewn waters. Even his bannermen doubted him. Suddenly he calls for Stannis, who tells him to mobilize his expeditionary fleet immediately with his fastest ships. The younger Baratheon's brows arch as he questions whether he will fight under the Slaver's banner. But to his surprise, Robert intends to fight against them. Instead, they will sail there to help Daenerys.
The same girl you've spent cursing these past 15 years.
I've spent my life cursing her family, Stannis. And look where it's gotten me. Ruling a kingdom that hates me, rotting on that damn chair. That girl's fighting for something. She's risking her life for it. I won't let her die while I sit here doing nothing.
And you would leave the Seven Kingdoms vulnerable? Who will hold the realm together in your absence?
You will. I trusted you to save me in King's Landing. Now I trust you can rule the Seven Kingdoms in my absence as my hand. No, not trust. I'm certain of it.
You would put this trust in me? Thank you. Very well. I will prepare the ships.
Of the expeditionary force, nearly 10,000 men are assembled, though only about 2,000 can fit in the vast squadron that Stannis has mobilized. Robert decides to lead this vanguard first and reinforce Meereen as best he can. The next few weeks are a critical time for the Seven Kingdoms, as the court makes preparations for Robert's departure. Ravens are sent to Renly to tell him to make preparations and inform the Queen as Robert soon sets sail. After weeks of sailing, Robert's flotilla approaches the glittering bay of Meereen. Their sails are emblazoned with the stag of House Baratheon, contrasting with the three-headed dragon of the city. As he approaches, Robert's eyes widen as he spots another dragon, though not one on a banner. Instead, it's a great beast with emerald scales. He beholds the sight, feeling a chill run down his spine as he sees the dragon for the first time. Even coiled lazily around a tower, its shadow spades the ship as it approaches. Robert couldn't help but feel a pang of unease at the sight of them. It was one thing to fight men, it was another to face creatures of fire and fury. Behind him, his knights and soldiers murmured amongst themselves, some awed by the sight of the foreign city, others whispering prayers to the Seven. When the fleet docked, they were greeted not with cheers, but with a wary silence. The gates of Meereen open slowly, revealing armed Unsullied standing at attention. They lead him to the Great Pyramid, where Daenerys Targaryen is waiting for them. Behind her is Missandei, her translator, and Grey Worm, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his spear. Then, to his surprise, he spots Sir Barristan Selmy with them.
So, the usurper himself comes to my city. Tell me, Robert Baratheon, why should I not have my dragons burn you where you stand?
You'd have to get them to me first, girl. And even if you did, you'd lose the one army that's come here to save your kingdom.
Save it? Or steal it for yourself, as you took the 7 kingdoms?
Your Grace, I served this man for many years. I know his faults as well as his strengths. If he has come all this way, it is not for conquest. It is because he sees a fight worth joining.
Barristan? Gods, what are you doing here?
Serving the rightful queen after your wife dismissed me from the Kingsguard. I had little reason to remain in King's Landing.
Cersei, of course. I'd have kept you if I could.
You didn't, Your Grace. I believe we should hear him out. If what he says is true, the Yunkish forces will be here within days. We need every ally we can find.
Speak then, Robert Baratheon. Convince me why I should not cast you back into the sea.
I know our families have had their issues, but there was a time when they worked together to change the world. That time does not need to pass. I'm not like you, and you don't like me. But even I know slavery is an evil in this world that cannot be allowed to persist. I know this because the Yunkish offered to let me join this coalition. But instead, I am here, with men and ships and my experience. Use it.
Very well. Prove yourself.
The first chance comes on Kizai Pass, which is crucial in receiving supplies from the Lazarene people and to block an assault from the cities there. Robert wastes no time organizing a raiding force to dislodge the sellsword company the Yunkish have positioned to block the base. Sir Barristan served as a liaison, helping to coordinate the efforts between the Baratheon soldiers and the Meereenese. When the first skirmish came, it was Robert who led the charge, clad in his heavy armor, his warhammer gleaming in the sun. He ambushes the Tall Lance's sellsword company while they are making camp. The attack comes so suddenly that the sellswords do not have time to form up. Robert laughs as his hammer crushes the nearest sellsword. Others begin to fall as they try to form makeshift barricades with boxes and saddles. However, this comes too late, and the Long Lances are driven from this pass, allowing supplies to flow in from Lazar. Meanwhile, Renly launches a daring night raid on some Yunkish forces camped outside the city, freeing their slaves and leading them inside. Lord Beric and Thoros of Myr take 200 men far behind enemy lines to disrupt their supply lines and ambush patrols. They try to arm slaves wherever they can and sow chaos in enemy ranks. Although small, these victories help raise morale in Meereen. Soldiers who have been wary and uncertain now stood a little taller. Aside from stories, Robert's presence seems to have a positive effect as he walks among their lines, drinking and laughing with the freedmen. Even Daenerys could not deny the effect that he had on her troops, and yet she remains distrustful, and it's not yet enough to stop the slavers' advance. Seeing that Robert is fighting for Daenerys, the Yunkish attack is in earnest. Their army, tens of thousands strong, begins their assault, laying siege to Meereen itself. Tensions begin to rise as the full strength of the slavers' alliance now bears down on them. Though Robert promises that reinforcements are on the way, it is little comfort now. The siege drags on for weeks, each day blending into the next as the people of Meereen grow weary and desperate. Inside the city walls, tempers flare and rations dwindle, but Robert Baratheon refuses to sit idly by. His warhammer in hand, he rallies his men for daring sorties, striking at the weaker points in the Yunkish forces. Renly rides beside him, along with Sir Barristan Selmy. They rally a motley force of Westerosi, sellswords, pit fighters, and freedmen in these attacks. The victories, though small, lift the spirits of Meereen's defenders. Songs are sung of the Storm Lord of Meereen, and Daenerys' soldiers begin to look at Robert with a mixture of respect and fear. Robert strikes at the weaker units of slaves, those owned by the masters inexperienced in war or hastily armed. Though the Yunkish make great efforts to dress their slaves up, many barely know one end of the spear to the other and fall before these sorties. Robert laughs as he crushes these units and sends the survivors running, slaying a few lesser commanders while Sir Barristan accepts any duel between champions. Renly launches hit-and-run attacks on these slaver forces, striking at their camps or stealing their treasure. During one instance, he strikes right in the middle of an auction, carrying off the prisoners they were selling. However, not all these sorties end well, as during one such battle, Renly runs headfirst into the disciplined spears of the Lockstep Legion. Rather than break, they raise their spears and halt its advance in its track, sending Renly into a hurried retreat. Soon more of these elite units begin to arrive. Lockstep legions, elephants, even some Dothraki, and 3 mercenary companies. With their presence, they begin to tighten the noose around Meereen. One sticking point is Daenerys' refusal to use her dragons in battle. Many of her advisors urge her to unleash them on the slavers' army and burn their siege engines, but she refuses. The recent death of a young girl, Hazi, at the flames of Drogon is enough to scare her. This frustrates her advisors to no end as the siege drags on. At first, Robert understands this as he recalls the fear of those dragons and the power they possess, but over the time, even he joins in the camp to unleash them. The breaking point comes when she hears of terms presented by Yunkai, promising peace if Daenerys were to marry a noble, his Dars Olarak. In exchange, they would leave Meereen in peace, but be allowed to rule themselves. As she prepares to leave the meeting, Robert hurries after her and asks for a moment.
Speak, Robert Baratheon. What wisdom have you come to bestow upon me this time?
You've got fire in you, Daenerys. I see it, but that fire means nothing if you don't use it. You've got dragons, 3 of them, enough power to end this war in an instant, and yet you refuse to unleash them.
Because I am not here to be another tyrant, Robert. Do you know what it's like to see innocent lives burned to cinder? To see children die because of your decisions? Hazi's death haunts me still. I will not risk another innocent life for the sake of my ambition.
You think I don't know what that feels like? Every battle leaves scars, Daenerys. Some you can see, some you can't. But a queen does not have the luxury of avoiding hard choices. You've got to think about the thousands who'll die if you lose this war, because you wouldn't do what needed to be done.
And you think you have the right to lecture me on ruling? You who sat on the Iron Throne you stole, while men like Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister have made the hard choices. You may have slew Rhaegar in battle. It was Ned and Tywin who took King's Landing and sacked it.
Suddenly, Robert's eyes gleamed dangerously.
Do not speak of Ned as if you knew him, just as you didn't know your father.
Her Grace is considering her options carefully. Do I have to remind you that you faced a similar choice before? You were presented with the bodies of Rhaegar's children. You could have condemned such a barbaric act, but chose to accept it. You saw those bodies, and those of the king, and decided that men such as Tywin and Jaime were free of guilt.
And where were you, Sir Barristan, when the Mad King burned men alive in his throne room? What would you do when he raped his wife? And what did you do when Cersei had Ned arrested? Do you expect me to believe you knew nothing of all these things? When hard choices came, I at least took action.
Barristan stiffens, looking as if he was struck, and then shame crosses his face as he bites his lip.
I didn't come here to fight with you, girl. I came here to help you win. But be careful whose name you slander, because Ned Stark is the only reason I'm here. Because I knew that if he were in my position, he would have sailed to your aid. I'm here to honor him, but I would never bend the knee to you. We are here as equals, and if you can't accept that, I'll take my men home. Your war, your city, your problem.
Daenerys' expression falters, the fire in her gaze dimming as the weight of Robert's words settle over her.
You've made your point, Robert. I will consider my options.
The morning dawns with smoke and fire as Daenerys Targaryen finally unleashes her dragons in a bold strike against the Yunkish forces. Drogon leads the charge, flames pouring from his jaws. Rhaegal and Viserion follow, their fiery breath burning through siege engines, tents, and rows of soldiers. Chaos erupts in the enemy camp as men scatter, screaming and flailing to escape the inferno. Robert watches from the walls of Meereen, his warhammer resting on his shoulder, a grin spreading across his lips as he orders his men to mount up. The gates swing open, and Robert charges out at the head of his force, the Unsullied and freedmen close behind. The siege of the dragons in the sky strikes fear in the Yunkish soldiers. They falter, their lines breaking apart as Robert's warhammer crashes through the shields and armor. The Unsullied fight with unrelenting discipline, driving the enemy back into organized ranks. Even the lockstep legions are not a match for them, keeping them pinned while freedmen flank their formation. Above them all, the dragons swoop and dive, their flames turning the battlefield into a smoldering ruin. The Yunkish forces retreat in disarray, abandoning siege engines and supplies as they pull back to regroup further from the city walls. For the first time, the defenders of Meereen feel the stirrings of hope. Days later, the relief force arrives, crushing the Yunkai fleet in a decisive naval battle. Cheers erupt from the walls as Sir Davos Seaworth and Bryce Caron lead reinforcements ashore. The two are welcomed as heroes as they enter the Great Pyramid.
About bloody time. I was starting to think you'd gotten lost.
Wouldn't leave
It
you to have
doesn't
all
take
the
long
fun,
for
Your Grace.
Robert to put Davos's smuggling skills to use. Under the cover of darkness, Davos ferries weapons, supplies, and soldiers to Lord Beric, embedded in the Yunkish rear. Bercy organizes a series of slave revolts, with enslaved laborers rising up against their masters and sabotaging supply lines. The Yunkish forces, already demoralized, find themselves stretched thin and trapped as rebellion spreads through their ranks. With their enemies weakened and disorganized, the Meereenese prepare for the final strike. At dawn, the attack begins. Dornish skirmishers led by the Red Viper lead the sortie. They charge fearlessly to meet the advancing elephants, raining javelins down upon the Yunkish elephants. The beasts panic, trumpeting wildly as they crash through their own ranks. The knights, under Bryce Caron's command, charge into the fray, smashing through Yunkish slingers and archers with brutal efficiency. In the center, the Unsullied and freedmen engage the heart of the Yunkish army. The clash is ferocious, the air filled with the sound of clashing steel and cries of dying men. Robert and Sir Barristan fight alongside their Westerosi troops in the center, helping break up their formation, while Renly leads a raid into their camps, setting fire and freeing their captives. Daenerys directs Drogon to target the largest pavilions, where the wise masters make their homes, burning those to the ground. Their flames consume entire camps, burning tents, supplies, and fleeing soldiers alike. The Yunkish forces, overwhelmed and leaderless, begin to crumble. With their line of retreat cut off, their naval forces in ruins, and their slaves turning against them, it is clear the battle is lost. Their only recourse is to surrender. Soon enough, terms are exchanged, and all slaves are to be freed at once, and councils are to be established in these cities to handle governance. The commanders of this rebellion are all executed, and Astapor and Yunkai must now submit to the might of Daenerys Targaryen. But as the celebrations begin throughout the city, Daenerys doesn't find it in her to join them right away. Instead, she stands atop the wall of the city, watching the battlefield below. The air is thick with the acrid stench of burning flesh and charred wood. The cries of the wounded faintly audible beneath the crackle of dying fires. The city is safe. Her people are safe. And yet, she cannot shake the hollow feeling in her chest. She knows the destruction was necessary. She knows they had no choice. But the sight of so much death sickens her.
Thought I'd find you here.
I didn't expect to see you here.
You're not the only one who hates the sight of this. They don't mention this in the songs and stories. What comes after?
You hate it. You seemed to relish the fight not long ago.
I've got the stomach for it. No denying that. But it's one thing to like a good fight, and it's another to see what that means. Thousands dying, entire villages laid to waste, and for what? What was it for? That's what I learned recently. Fighting beyond the sake of fighting.
Still, it's horrific.
Maybe the gods made it that way so that we never learn to enjoy it. Anyone who enjoys this, they make for poor kings. I should know.
Daenerys studies him, his words conflicting with the image she's long held of the usurper, a brute who cared only for blood and drink. But standing here, his voice tinged with regret, she sees something else.
You speak as though you've seen it all before.
I've fought enough wars to fill a dozen lifetimes. Won most of them too. But the victories, They don't bring you peace unless you fix what's broken. I suppose that's what Ned Stark always wanted to show me.
Why are you telling me this? You of all people.
Because I didn't come here just to help you. There's something else. Something bigger than this war. Bigger than the Seven Kingdoms. In the north, beyond the wall, there's a threat unlike anything you've ever seen. The dead walk, led by a force that'll make this battle look like a tavern brawl. They're coming, Daenerys. And if we don't stand together, they'll tear through the Seven Kingdoms. We'll be reduced to nothing.
Daenerys stares at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. But all she sees is grim conviction.
What are they?
White Walkers. I didn't believe it at first either, but I've seen enough now to know it's real. And if we don't stop them, nothing else will matter.
You helped me when you had no reason to. You fought for my people. I owe you my help in return.
Good. Because we'll need dragons for this fight. All the dragons we can get.
3,000 likes gets part 3 made. Let's get it quick. That's our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.